March and April has come to an end. We are now at the beginning of May, and I wanted to share something kind of interesting about March and April, at least for music teachers, with you guys. Every single year around this time is when all the competitions are happening, and at school you have all your projects are happening, you have midterms. Depending on your school, some schools have finals. All the sports tournaments are happening during this time as well. Dance competitions, swim meets, track meets. On the music front of things, you also have a lot of performances. If you're in a musical, you have several shows. Being a music teacher during this time is really weird because there are two polar opposite things that can happen as a result of the scheduling being so crazy during this time. I understand that my own students tend to be pretty gung-ho about doing lessons because they found me through these videos, and so the people who would find me to take lessons are people who are very self-driven and self-motivated. So I get that. But even for them, around this time, you either get people who have to delay lessons. As a teacher, you're just gonna have to be okay with that. You have to be understanding, especially if you have self-driven, self-motivated students. I urge you teachers to not take it personally. I know some people can take it pretty personally, and I know that I have been tempted to take it personally. Because this is my main income, you do kind of wonder to yourself, like, well, like, how am I gonna get paid? Am I gonna get all my bills paid? Am I gonna get my rent paid? Can I buy food? It's tough because you kind of get into your own brain and you start thinking more about yourself than you're really thinking about your student. But you know, if you put yourself into your student's shoes, you can see, I mean, there's no real point in having a lesson if they're that busy. Also during this time is when it's allergy season for a lot of places around the world. People tend to get really sick, not just allergies, but people actually get sick. I got sick myself too. It's crazy. At a certain point, your students really have to just kind of say no, because they would literally just show up and not really have anything to play for you. What are you going to talk about, right? It's very tempting as a teacher, especially if this is your main source of income, to push for the student to have lessons anyway and to have makeup lessons on a different day of the week and stuff like that. I myself am still struggling with this too, but this year especially, I was making it a priority of mine to just be very understanding of what my students are going through. Side note, I find that it's really kind of weird that it doesn't matter who I teach, like literally all around the world, because I have students from Germany, UK, Australia, as well as all over the US and in Canada. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, at least in the parts of the world that I teach. Things just go crazy in March and April. Without fail, every single year in March and April, my schedule kind of goes through this, like, I call it my annual schedule upheaval. Suddenly people can't come to lessons, or if they do come to lessons, they're like, hey, can we make a different day instead? Because like my schedule is changing and you know, I'm doing this competition and that competition and I'm part of this sport and that sport and blah, blah, blah. At this point in May is kind of when the dust sort of starts to settle a little bit, but then right after this month, people are going to start leaving for vacation, for summer vacation. So that is like another mini upheaval. But the first big schedule upheaval every year is in March and April. Has happened every single year since I've started teaching. It threw me off really badly the first few years because you get really concerned. You feel like you don't have any control over your schedule. That aside, the second thing that can happen if your students are insistent on coming to lessons anyway, because I have those, they come to lessons and they start the lesson off by telling you that they have not had time to practice, that they've either been sick or driven crazy by allergies, they have too many projects, papers, exams, tournaments, competitions, shows, performances. I'm amazed that some of these students still show up to lessons. This is why I always take the first few minutes at the very least to ask them what's going on in your life. Can you give me some updates? I know that some people really like to keep their lessons very separate from the rest of their lives, but the thing is, I find it's really difficult to gauge how fast I should be teaching something, how much I should expect them to accomplish in the lesson, how much information can they actually absorb that lesson if I don't know how tired you are or how overwhelmed you are with other things. When things are less overwhelming, I do find that most students can pick up on things really quickly. I can teach them a lot of things within the hour, but as soon as they start to get overwhelmed with other things, I start getting like really blank looks. It's as if there's like a lag, like there's a delay. I get sort of like a Oh, okay. That always happens in March and April without fail to, I would say, like 100% of my students. I've lately just been telling my students that, like, hey, it's okay. You're not the only person showing up to lessons like this. Literally 100% of my other students are also starting off every lesson telling me that they haven't had time to practice and they're really tired. So what do? It's either they don't show up for lessons, they have to delay it, or they show up for lessons and they stare at you because they're basically a zombie at that point. And you can't blame them for feeling like a zombie because their life is just making them into zombies. I was putting myself in their shoes and I was remembering how when I was in grade 12 and I was auditioning into music school, truth be told, I was only actually practicing about 15 minutes a day. Not good. What are you practicing in 15 minutes, right? You're not really practicing. You're really just kind of running through everything to make sure that you can still play it. It's almost like brushing your teeth on the flute, and like literally that's it. You're not learning anything. You're not trying anything new. You're literally just kind of like go, 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 just make sure you can still play it, and then I need to go study something else. I thought about like, what could I have done during that time that would have made my lessons much better? I started kind of asking my students like, hey, do you have some days where you have more time to think about things? I would say most of them say, yeah, there's like one day or so each week. You're lucky if you can get 2 days, but at least one day per week, they can get a quality practice session in. So for some people, that's half an hour if they're more beginner. If they're more intermediate level, then that's about an hour. If they're more advanced, then it's like a good 2-hour session. So I've started to try something out, and for those of you who are teaching, you may want to try this out too. During busy times, so basically the March and April of every year, you can suggest for your students to just let themselves have only one quality practice session, but their focus in that practice session is not drilling. Their focus is learning something new. Ideally, what they'll do is they'll take the concepts that you taught them in the latest lesson and they will work at it to learn it in that practice session. Then all of the other practice sessions for the remaining days of the week, they just do basically 10 to 15 minute run-throughs, their maintenance basically. So essentially what they're doing is they're maintaining everything that they learned in one practice session. I find that that gives some hope. I think hope is the better word than motivation, I feel, in this case. A lot of times it's not that they're not motivated, it's that they're just tired. There's too much to do. They don't have the energy. So it's not about motivation anymore at this time, because motivation means nothing if you don't have the energy to practice, right? I was thinking at the very least what I can offer them is a bit of hope that they have something to check out with me in the next lesson. Sure, it might be slower learning than all the other months of the year, but that's okay. It's still learning. To me, it's like you're still doing something. You're still feeling like you're growing, even though maybe you're growing at a slower pace. That's totally fine. That's kind of part of the season of March and April. And you have to accept that. You have to be fine with it and you have to work with it. And I find that this way of working with it, where you just accept the one quality practice session per week, plus a bunch of maintenance practice sessions, gives people a lot of hope, because they're like, okay, that's fine then. I don't have to feel guilty anymore. And since I don't have to feel guilty, I can actually relax in this quality practice session, and I can look forward to the quality practice session to learn something. Like, it gives them hope. It gives them something to look forward to. Having a quality practice session is no longer a guilt-tripping thing. It's a very hopeful and fun. It's a good time to look forward to. That like, hey, I get to learn. It doesn't become an obligation anymore. I found that as soon as I told some of my students to try that out, the next lessons that came afterwards they just sounded and looked a lot more relaxed coming into lessons, which I feel is the best way to teach someone, is when they're actually relaxed and they don't have their guards up. It feels like a wall. Letting them be okay with just being a slower learner in March and April, it really helps people. This obviously does not work for students who opt to not show up for lessons, which I totally understand that too. Totally get it. It's a very valid way of dealing with the stress of March and April. Oh, right, it's tax season in lots of places around the world in April as well. So for the adults, it gets really crazy around that time as well. I personally found that implementing this particular practice routine this year has been hugely beneficial to my students, far more than any previous year that I've taught. To be honest, I'm kind of doing this to myself too, where I'm just kind of like, maybe have a few days here and there where I'm actually having a quality practice session, but then the other days I'm just kind of like trying to keep myself relaxed and trying to just like maintain the stuff that I already know how to do. And that helped me get through March and April as well in my own personal practice sessions. Anyway, I'll see you guys next week. Hope that helps you out. Bye.